Right, let's just take you to Bank now this evening, where another cyclist protest is taking place following the death of a 26-year-old woman there last week. The so-called die-in comes after a woman was taken to hospital earlier today after the bike she was on crashed with a lorry near Blackfriars Bridge. Luke Blackwall is in the city for us. Luke, what's happening there?
That's right, you can probably see behind me I'm in the middle of a protest now. It's organised by the campaign group Stop Killing Cyclists. Earlier on they were lying on the pavement in a so-called die-in, which has become increasingly popular, or increasingly regular I should say, seen on London streets. And the mood here is fairly sombre because not only are they protesting about increased safety, getting more safety measures for cyclists on London streets, but it's also a memorial. They're here to remember the cyclists who have died recently. Two last week, including one, Ying, a 26-year-old woman who died on this very junction just last week. There were protests organised here last week too. And it does come, as you say, on the day of another worrying news about a cyclist injury. A woman came into collision with a lorry near Blackfriars Bridge a little bit earlier on. Her injuries were said to be life-threatening. She's now said to be in a stable condition. We'll bring you any more news on that as it comes.
Let's just take you back to Bank now this evening, where another cyclist protest is taking place. This follows the death of a 26-year-old woman there last week. The so-called die-in comes after a woman was taken to hospital earlier today after the bike she was on crashed with a lorry near Blackfriars Bridge. Well, Luke Blackwall is in the city and can give us the latest. Luke, what's happening now?
That's right, Anthony. I've stepped a little bit away from the protest now because it's quite loud and you may hear it in the background, so apologies if you do. We came away just to speak to a very important person who is among the protests. Now, you remember, these protests are not only to campaign for greater cycle safety, but they're also in memorial of cyclists who have died. There were two cyclists who died on London's streets just earlier this month. One of those was 26-year-old Ying. She died just behind where the camera is now, where Bank of England meets this busy junction here. And I'm joined now by one of her friends who's very kindly agreed to talk to me about it. Now tell me briefly about Ying and what was she like as a person?
Well, she's a very kind person and she's passionate about life. She excelled at everything she did, and she attended Cambridge and Oxford University and got first class. She's obviously very bright, and we are just so sad to lose her as a friend.
What do you hope a protest like this will achieve in her memory?
Well, I hope that London will be safer from this protest and just ban the large lorries from entering the city in rush hours. We hope this kind of tragedy wouldn't happen again.
Are you hopeful that people are listening to this protest when it's happening?
Yes, of course. I mean, Ying's death has to be meaningful, you know. We wouldn't hope anyone have this kind of tragedy again.
Thank you so much for sharing your story. The friend there of Ying, 26-year-old, who was killed here just last week. And you remember that it's also a day, you mentioned earlier, Anthony, when another serious incident involving a female cyclist again this morning. A woman was knocked off her bike in a collision with a lorry earlier by Blackfriars Bridge. Early reports suggested that her injuries were life-threatening. It's now said that she is in a stable condition. We'll bring you any more news on that as we get it. And earlier we spoke to Boris Johnson, Mayor of London. We asked him about the Mayor's response to the issue of cycle safety.
Cycling in London is safer than it's ever been. Last year, 2014, there were fewer casualties, I think, per mile travelled than ever before. It's the safest it's been in the history of since records began. And obviously one injury or one fatality is too many, but I really would caution people against getting too anxious about cycling. We are putting in a lot of measures to make it safer, and they in the form not just of interventions in the roads, but also education, trying to make sure that cyclists are more aware of the risks, and of course that lorry drivers, in particular other motorists, are more aware of the risks.
Boris Johnson talking about a lot of measures there, from education to implementing changes within the roads. But of course, protesters here will be asking, can they be implemented in time before we hear news of yet another injury or worse, fatality involving a cyclist on London streets?